episode 64 of the Habs Culture Podcast. My name is Justin Schwartz, and I'm alongside Liam Baum as usual. And the Montreal Canadiens officially have game one of the regular season, game one of the 2023-24 regular season under their belt. And I got to say, Liam, it feels pretty good. I mean, we'll get into the game soon, and obviously it didn't finish the way the Montreal Canadiens would have hoped, but it feels good to have hockey back. And I think you can vouch for that as well.
Yeah, very nice to have it back. And we'll get right into the game.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's going to be a fun season. I think if we're looking on the past two seasons, I don't think it can get much worse. So I think there's a lot to improve on this season. A lot of, I won't call it, there's a few new players, but there's also a few returning players that have a little bit more to prove this season. With maybe a second Montreal Canadiens season under their belt. So that's always exciting. You always have your key players like Suzuki and Caulfield that are going to almost show up basically every game. So that's always exciting. And essentially, you're going to have a very competitive division in the Atlantic. Now, maybe not necessarily, the Montreal Canadiens might not necessarily be searching for a playoff spot this season. But one thing to note is that the Atlantic division, even though it's still a top division in this league, obviously has its weaknesses. So it'll be interesting to see where Montreal ends up placing, considering that both of us see them finishing last in our Atlantic Division rankings. So that's going to be interesting to follow over the course of the season. But Liam, I'm going to throw it on to you right away. Initial reactions, thoughts, players that stood out, players that didn't stand out. What do you have for me?
Honestly, there's a lot to talk about, but I think the perfect place to start is the Dak, Slavkovsky, and Newhook line. They contributed 2 goals, if I'm not actually, 2 goals. Newhook had 2. Overall, just very exciting to watch. They moved really fast. They hustled, won the battles. Slav looked like a completely different player compared to the 36 games we saw from him last season. That I'll just get right into the first Newhook goal where Dak won the battle down low in the defensive end, moved it up to, Slavkovsky won the battle down low, moved it up to Dak, came back to Slav, and he passed it right across to Newhook, who scored. Very nice play. The Habs look really energized. And yeah, your thoughts on that line?
Oh, I think that was the best line that game. And I'll be honest with you, I was sitting on my couch watching this game, and obviously going into this game, I was purely excited to watch Slav because I was telling myself this needs to be a different season from Slav, and it starts game one against the Leafs in Toronto. He proved that to me. And on the score sheet, you're looking at an assist, you're looking at +2, you're looking and off the score sheet, let's look at the intangibles. You're looking at a lot of hustle. You're looking at a lot of anticipation on Slav's part, a little bit more of a heads up game from him, which really, really surprised me and made me happy as a Habs fan. But the one thing I will say is that I went into this game obviously looking forward to watching Slav, but I was also exceptionally excited to watch Suzuki and Caulfield. And I was really excited to watch that line. And the truth is that halfway through the game, I was almost more excited to watch that second line, we'll call it that second line, of Doc, Newhook, and Slav, as opposed to watching that first line, which was composed of Suzuki, Anderson, and Caulfield. And nothing against those guys, but it was just that line was really bringing it. And I really hope that that's something that we're going to see more consistently for the rest of the season.
Yeah, for sure. No, they looked really good together. And, a good thing to point out here is the Habs scored 5 goals. And typically scoring is a problem. I know it's the first game of the season, but when you score 5 goals, you should be able to win the game. But at least it's a positive that we're able to put the puck in the net.
Oh,
but,
100%.
Yeah. Just going on to the Suzuki, Caulfield, and Anderson line. Obviously, you know what they're going to bring to the table every night. On the power play, Caulfield's going to score. He's going to shoot the puck. But Anderson just did not look like he was able to keep up with him that game. He, just was making a few mistakes and just doesn't fit in playing against the top players every game. I just don't think he's the right player to play on that line.
Yeah, and I really and I agree. And look, I'll break the news to you right now. Not that it's anything that anyone would have no one would have expected anything different, but as of practice today, the lines are staying the same. So they're not touching anything. It's game 2. That's probably what's expected. The truth is that I think, although you have Anderson playing on that right side, I think that over the course of time, you're going to see a little bit of a bump in RHP's involvement in that top six. Now, I think that we can both agree that RHP might not necessarily be that top six guy that you want him to be, but I think that it's not necessarily a question of skill with RHP. I think it's a question of the way he can complement the players on his line. And I think that he's relatively volatile in that case. And to in terms of playing next to a guy like Caulfield and Suzuki. And I agree with you. I don't think Anderson looked good. I think that he looked mentally slow in comparison to Suzuki and Caulfield. And I don't think that his game complements their game properly. So if that's going to be a consistent theme throughout this season, I think they're going to run into more problems than not. And they're going to be searching for another winger to complement that line sooner rather than later.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the right thing to talk about there. He was slow mentally, but again, a positive here is that at least the lines are staying together, unlike last season where it seemed like every single game the lines were changing. You can't build chemistry like that. You're not going to win games. So at least they're trying to, maybe create the connection, because there has been one in the past, but last game it just wasn't too good for Anderson.
Absolutely. And look, even if you wanted to stuff Monahan on that line, I really did think that third line, I don't know if I want to call it, I don't know if I want to say struggled, but I definitely want to say looked slow for this new generation, for this new NHL that we're looking at. And between Pearson, Gallagher, and Monahan, I think all those players bring something to the table as individuals, but as a line it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me. And look, I know that the Montreal Canadiens are not in a position to necessarily push for a playoff spot or even compete at an exceptionally high level with some of the bigger teams. But nonetheless, you're going to want to stay competitive. And I think that that's where a lot of teams are going to be able to take advantage of the Montreal Canadiens, because a lot of third lines have become a little bit more speedy and a little bit more forecheck heavy. And I don't think that the players on that line can keep up with that pace.
No.
So that might beg the question for a switch from, like I said, taking Monahan from that third line or taking RHP from that fourth line and giving Anderson more of that checking role on that third line and diverting his skill a little bit. But that will be interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I mean, hopefully when Dvorak comes back, he'll be able to slot in there and, change the dynamic a little. But, Monahan looked pretty good, I found. Pearson was a bit, I don't know, unnoticeable, I'd say. He didn't really have anything like a standout moment, but Gallagher just looked really, really slow and just seemed like he was dragging that whole line down. So obviously he signed for a long time. It's only one game. He can't overreact here, but he really didn't look too good the other night.
No, I agree. And it's tough to see because honestly, as a Montreal Canadiens fan, you haven't had many players who have stuck around their whole career in Montreal, right? Other than Price, right? So it was always nice to see Gallagher, a guy that came from the Hamilton Bulldogs and really worked his way up to make the Montreal Canadiens roster as a late round draft pick, and he's still here. And you know what? That money that was given to him might have been a mistake, but it's hard to let go of that connection that Montreal Canadiens fans have with a guy like Gallagher. But unfortunately, it seems like his better days are in the past. Speaking of better days in the past, I think it's a good transition for a guy like Jake Allen. Look, it's one game. Not going to overreact. There's no need to overreact because, we're not impulsive Habs fans. Like it's a process. But I do think that Jake Allen's time as a Montreal Canadiens starter is over, and I think that we're already seeing that transition Saturday night coming up tomorrow night against the Chicago Blackhawks. Samuel Montembeault is already confirmed for that game. Do you think that's something, like we discussed this at length about how Monty should probably be the starter for the season? They opened up with starting Allen. We both kind of looked at each other and said, well, what's going on here? Do you think that the Montreal Canadiens brass and coaching staff have changed their mind already?
I mean, I think the summer had a big thing to do with it. Montembeault looked really, really good at the World Championships, had an outstanding tournament, and even last season, he had a pretty solid season for a bottom feeder team. But then again, Allen did make 37 saves, but that Noah Gregor goal, I swear it was the same damn play that happened in the preseason. The guy just walks in on the left side and just shovels it towards the net and finds a way. And like Allen is just so out of position sometimes. And again,
even the Matthews goal too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Matthews goal. Matthews just shoots it from the corner. Like Allen's, he just seems slow. But I mean, he did make 37 saves, and he didn't have a horrible game, I wouldn't say. But yes, I think his time is definitely coming to an end as a starting goalie in Montreal. And I think Montreal kind of missed the opportunity to get some value back for him last season or even the season before, because now he just doesn't seem like a guy who's able to keep up with, playing a full season where some teams were looking for a goalie to be their number one. And Allen seemed like he could be that guy. But I mean, again, it's one game. You can't overreact. Allen he's a solid goalie, but there's just these little things that keep happening that, just can't happen.
Oh, that's for sure. And I mean, look, there's obviously you can't attribute all the fault to a guy like Allen in a game like that where it's so high scoring and back and forth, and momentum plays such a massive role in a game like that. But the truth is that when the Montreal Canadiens in that game are up 4-2, I want to say, after the Ylonen goal. Is it Ylonen? Who scored the fourth? No, it wasn't Ylonen.
I think
Anyway,
Newhook scored the fourth.
right. Okay. So it might have been when Newhook scored the fourth and Ylonen had scored the fifth. But maybe we were up 4-3. I forget exactly what the situation was. But nonetheless, that Matthews goal, his second goal of the game, where he kind of scores on the doorstep and kind of just shovels it past Allen's skate there on the post. You got to think, like, again, I'm not going to go out and give him a completely hard time for that goal, but that changes a lot in that game. You give them that goal, now they're within one, they're pulling the goalie, they have 5 incredibly talented players on the ice. Like, you're almost asking for it. And unfortunately, Allen was on the receiving end, was the one that has to reap the consequences. But you got to think, like, you need to be sharp in those moments, and you need to be a little bit better, especially in game one where you have the lead and you need to preserve it late in the game. So that's my take.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think moving on to the defenseman now, Jack was my standout defenseman of the game. He came into the game fighting Ryan Reeves. I wouldn't say it was much of a fight, more of like a tussle, but he sets the tone early. I like him on the power play too, as that quarterback on PP2 looked really good, and he shoots the puck. So I think he's really developing into a player that's sustainable in the long term, and he's going to be in that top 6 all the time. Just overall looked really good. He's showing that he's not a goon, essentially, not just a goon, and he can actually play the game. So I was very happy with his performance. Again, I thought Matheson had a pretty strong game overall. He's always quick, always making the heads up plays. Yeah, no, that's just what I have to say about the D-men.
No, I was going to agree with you there. I thought Matheson had a very strong game, and I think that he really is, for a team like the Montreal Canadiens, who again are not in a competing spot, he's definitely a number one defenseman right now for Montreal. I don't mean for a Stanley Cup winning team. I mean for Montreal.
Mm.
So he's nice to have on your team, who's obviously providing a lot of value on his contract currently. And then you look at a guy like Jack, who really showed up this game. Obviously was a little bit on the bubble in terms of, with defensemen coming up, whether it was Morgan Barron or whether it was Matthias Norlinder or whether it was even Logan Mailloux, right? Like, these guys were fighting for spots, and rightfully so. So I thought, Jack had to come out here and prove his worth, and he definitely did more than that. The shot on the Newhook tip was perfect. He gets pucks to the net, which I find is so valuable, especially for a guy that was always deemed to be a little bit more, like you mentioned, a rougher player who played a little bit more of a defensive game. But he's showing that he has those offensive capabilities, which is really nice, and especially on that second power play unit. Other than that, though, none of the other guys were really noticeable in my opinion. I always like Harris's game, and I think he plays such a simple game, which is always such a good thing. If you don't notice the guy, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It doesn't mean it's, especially on defense. So I think the D-corps did a good job overall. Gooley wasn't really that noticeable to me, which means it's a positive thing. So again, not much on their part, but definitely it's funny because it's hard to say that it was a strong game defensively when we gave up 6 goals, or I guess 5.
Mm.
But I don't think that they played particularly bad. I think I think that the Leafs capitalized on the special teams, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, very unfortunate that they weren't super disciplined. But, again, like I said before, we scored 5 goals. That's a positive. And we took a top team to overtime and shootout. So, again, I think the Habs proved that they can possibly be a competitive team. I guess we'll see in the next few games. But again, I'm just looking at the positives here.
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, look, I always think that there's a little bit of an overreaction from everyone when it comes to the first 10 games of the NHL season, because the truth is that a lot of teams are fresh, they're ready to roll, and they're ready to play and compete. And I think that that's the and again, granted, if the Montreal Canadiens could stay healthy, I think that's a huge benefactor for them, because last season they and even the season before, the amount of man games lost was just like through the roof. It wasn't normal. And I think that they lost when it came to last season, specifically with Slavkovsky, with Caulfield. Doc missed a ton of games. Gallagher missed games. I don't think Suzuki missed very much, if at all.
No,
But Gouli missed a ton of games. So it was just a question of man games lost. And if the Montreal Canadiens could stay healthy and preserve those games, then maybe they could be a different team. But
for
all
sure.
that to say is that I think that there's a little bit of an overreaction sometimes to the first couple games. But look, at the end of the day, the Montreal Canadiens went stride for stride with the Toronto Maple Leafs 3 nights ago, and you can only hope for more of that. Competitive games are always fun to watch, and I'm not particularly mad with that game, considering that the Leafs are supposed to finish first in the Atlantic, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, again, first game of the season, but I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a good way to look at it.
Absolutely. So overall, look, we're overall happy. I think honestly, if anything, what that game brought to me is an excitement to watch game 2 and game 3 and so on and so forth, right? And I'm really and again, I don't think we touched on it much, but I think that Newhook looked like a very, very, very strong player for Montreal last night. And again, we talked about it at length this offseason about how Newhook, and I want to hear what you have to say about this, but Newhook was always sheltered in Colorado, like very limited minutes. Didn't have a lot of success at the center position. Was always a talented player, but was never given that opportunity. Now you put him under a regime where he's under Martin St. Louis, has a lot of growing to do, but a lot of growing to do alongside guys that also have a lot of growing to do and a lot of development to go through. So you're really placing him under amazing circumstances. And I think I think that is a major, I think he benefits a lot from that. And 2 goals and looked absolutely unstoppable in the offensive zone. Very good in close quarters. Was very good when it came to heads up plays. What did you think about him, and what did you think about his overall game last 2 nights ago?
No, like we talked about in the preseason, he looks super fast. Just again, he looks like a completely different player than he was in Colorado, just because he's getting that opportunity. And I think it's a really good plan in place to get all these guys who are around the same age and developing together and being brought up as a team that's eventually going to contend for the playoffs. But yeah, just overall, he's just in a great position right now. I think Colorado's kind of missing out on what they kind of needed, like some young legs to help out their aging core. So I think the Habs got a really good guy here. I think he's going to develop really well. And, hopefully he turns into like a 25, 30 goal scorer who can put up a good amount of points. But yeah, overall, very happy with his game. He really complements Slav and Dak with his speed. I think, yeah, I just think he complements them very well. And yeah, I don't have a lot to say about that, but pretty
Look,
happy
at
with his
the end of the
performance.
day, yeah, sorry, but at the end of the day, he's on pace for about 164 goals. So looking towards that, looking at that, I think that's definitely something to be excited about. But jokes aside, obviously, I think that he's going to show that he's a capable goal scorer and a more than capable top 6 forward on this Montreal Canadiens team. And he's already, I won't say proven that, but he's showing good signs of that so far. I think it would be a good idea, Liam, if we get into the 2 games that are coming up for the Montreal Canadiens this week. More specifically, the Montreal Canadiens will be taking on the Chicago Blackhawks tomorrow night. So that's Saturday, October 14th in Montreal. So Montreal's home opener. And then we'll be taking on the. Why did I lose the game? Why did I lose the
Minnesota
game?
Wild.
Yeah,
Minnesota
because I
Wild.
was looking at Chicago's schedule. My bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, they will be taking on the Minnesota Wild in Montreal as well on Tuesday. So those are 2 games that we're looking forward to coming up. Liam and I kind of agreed, and hopefully are going to stick to getting out an episode for next week as well. So we're going to kind of do these weekly reviews with weekly matchups and things to look out for these games, and we'll do a couple predictions as well. So for the game in Chicago, Liam, let's look at Chicago so far. They've had two games under their belt. They're 1-1, And the headline, of course, is Connor Bedard. I'm not going to
Yeah.
sugarcoat it. It's Connor Bedard. He has 2 points in 2 games. A lot of the guys that they signed, whether it's Corey Perry, Ryan Donato, Nick Foligno, or I guess you could say are stepping up to the plate to a certain extent. They're providing because they're given elevated roles. But the one thing I want to note here is that Connor Bedard is averaging through 2 games 21 and a half minutes per game as an 18-year-old
It's
forward in
insane.
this league.
Insane. Yeah, he's looked really, really good. He creates every play for that team. It's like him on Regina. He's carrying these bums, man. They don't have a team around him. They brought in all these guys who are going to provide leadership and hopefully develop him as a person. But I don't know. Maybe they'll give him some pointers on how to be a good hockey player. Corey Perry was a 50-goal scorer, but they did lose Taylor Hall. Doesn't sound like he's going to be playing against the Habs. He's day to day, or I think Luke Richardson said week to week, but it sounds like it's going to be a bit less than that. So yeah, Bedard coming to Montreal, the only time this season, it's gonna be a show. He's gonna be that guy in Chicago, so it's gonna be fun to watch.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. You're looking at a goalie matchup tomorrow night that will probably be Samuel Montembeault versus Peter Mrazek, presumably. Arvid Soderblom might be the starter, but for right now, we're going to make the assumption that it's Peter Mrazek. He's looked all right through 2 games, made a ton of saves and nice saves at that. But obviously, that second game against Buffalo didn't go the
Boston.
against Boston didn't go the way that they wanted it to. But anyway, that's going to be an interesting goalie matchup to watch because if Samuel Montembeault can outduel Peter Mrazek, which we would like to hope is more than likely, that can be good news for the Montreal Canadiens. But the one thing I wanted to note is that it's going to be that first line, the Suzuki Caulfield, and I guess right now, that Josh Anderson line against Connor Bedard and his counterparts. And I say counterparts because I feel like without Taylor Hall, who knows who's going to be on that first line? As of right now, Daily Faceoff has it as Taylor Radish on the left and Ryan Donato on the right. So I think that even that second line, I think that even the Slav line or the dock line, whatever you want to call it, is going to be able to take advantage of those matchups, especially at home. And I would love to see that 5-on-5 dominance from our top 6 versus their top 6.
Yeah, considering their team is really, really weak, I think the Habs beat them on every single line and defenseman lines if you're comparing them to. So hopefully we're able to put up a lot of goals, capitalize on the power play, use this game as, I'm not going to say like a learning or a stepping stone.
I think you call it like a get right game.
Yeah, this is a team the Habs should beat, considering they just scored 5 on the Leafs. So, praying for the win and just hopefully get a good, solid, and overall consistent game out of all our players.
There you go. And I think, and again, like we were going to focus on specific matchups, so there was line matchups and whatnot. I don't even think it's worth it because the truth is that even though the Montreal Canadiens are not specifically or are not particularly an amazing team in terms of depth, I think that their depth is miles ahead of what Chicago has on their roster. And I think it's going to be really a question of if Connor Bedard at 5-on-5 and on the power play is going to be able to carry his team, I guess you could say, with his individual skills. But again, I guess that will be, I guess we'll see that tomorrow night. So we'll leave that at that. Obviously, a couple players to watch other than Connor Bedard, the young Lucas Reichel centering that second line center position, as well as Kevin Korchinski, second pairing left side for the Chicago Blackhawks. So obviously this team is built with a lot of veterans, but they have a couple or a few younger players that are always fun to watch. So that's going to be probably the headline for Saturday night, other than Connor Bedard.
A lot of young talent there.
There you go. And then moving on to the Montreal Canadiens' second game of the week, which is going to come against the Minnesota Wild on Tuesday night. Liam, what are we looking for here? Like what if Montreal, let's say presumably tomorrow night, picks up the victory at home, and now they're on Tuesday back at home? Is this, again, the season's long, and I'm never going to call it a must-win unless, it's never going to be a must-win for the Montreal Canadiens. But what would you like to see the Montreal Canadiens do on Tuesday night other than win? I want specifics here. What do they need to do to be successful Tuesday night against Kirill Kaprizov and the Minnesota Wild?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer here is shut down that Kaprizov and Zuccarello line. But I'm going to give, a different take here. And It's to score on Philip Gustafson. This guy had a heck of a game last night, shutting out the Panthers with 41 saves. And last season, he kind of broke out, showed the type of goaltender he is. But I think this season's going to be really different for him. I think he's going to be outstanding. And I think that the Habs just got to solve him, get on the board early, continue to forecheck hard and shut down their second line. They've got Joel Eriksson Ek, who I think is a top tier talent in the league, and they're probably going to be matching up against uh, the Dak Slavkovsky Newhook line, and I think they got to capitalize on that. The Habs do have some; they've got offensive players, and Minnesota does lack a bit in scoring besides Kaprizov and Zuccarello. So I think they got to capitalize on that, and again, capitalize on their power play and penalty kill.
Absolutely. And I think where Montreal will be able to take advantage of them, and I say unfortunately because I think that first line is obviously the first two lines are very, very strong for Minnesota, and you can actually bring up the case that Montreal's top two lines are relatively strong and obviously are gonna be out to prove something. But I think where Montreal is gonna really be able to take advantage of them is gonna be on that last line. I think that the speed that you have on that fourth line with Jake Evans and RHP really brings a lot to the table versus a fourth line of Patrick Maroon, Connor Dewar, and Brandon Duhaime. And I think that it obviously it's those nitty gritty details. And unfortunately, I think that Minnesota definitely has the top tier power play, which is just an absolute masterclass by Kirill Kaprizov, who's just a wizard with the puck at this point. But if Montreal's going to want to win this game, it's I'm not going to say it's not going to come from the first two lines, but I think they're going to be able to really take advantage of those matchups in that bottom six. And like you said, beating Philip Gustafson already on the season through one game, a 41 save shutout. He took over the crease last season after splitting time with Fleury. Now he's in a full-time role, presumably. I'm sure Fleury will get his games, but I think for the most part, it's going to be Philip's net.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that Montreal, after hopefully going 1-1, are going to bring the heat and expose, the small areas that they can against this. We'll call it good Minnesota team.
Yeah, I think another point to talk about here is that again, this is a clash of young talent. Once again, Minnesota's got Brock Faber, very outstanding rookie, on their first D pairing, and they've got Kalen Addison lower in the lineup, as well as Marco Rossi. So there's a lot of young guys, as well as Boldy. So yeah, again, a lot of young talent here. It's going to be exciting to watch. Probably going to be a quick game. But again, Minnesota was one of the worst teams in terms of goals for last season. So the Habs got to capitalize on that. They got to score their goals.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be and I think the last thing I want to highlight about this personally would be the matchup presumably between Kirby Dach and Joel Eriksson Ek at that center position on that second line. I think that those two players, obviously Joel Eriksson Ek probably a little bit better defensively than Kirby Dach, but nonetheless, I think both of them are 5-on-5 players that do a very good job of slowing down the game for their counterparts, for their wingers. So I think that that's going to be really interesting to see who dominates that 5-on-5 time, because in the Leafs game, the Montreal Canadiens matchup on that second line for Kirby Dach was absolutely phenomenal. I think that they dominated the time. I think that they dominated the ozone time against that Leafs line, and they constantly had that puck, constantly had possession of that puck. And I think that that's something that the Montreal Canadiens really need to hammer down for the rest of the season, is emphasizing that, yes, that first line is always going to be pretty dominant and is gonna put up a ton of points, but to have a second line that can equally produce while dominating the pace of play is also so important. So if they could take advantage of that against a very good defensively or well-rounded line, I guess run by Joel Eriksson Ek, the Montreal Canadiens could be pretty successful in that game.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely controlling the ozone. And yeah, at the same time, just that power play breakout, they've got to hammer down on that one, because it looks a bit rough.
I need to say this flat out. I can't understand. I can't understand why there hasn't been any changes made to this power play. It is the same linear process year after year. It's the same linear breakout. It's the same linear concepts. And at one point, when you're consistently bottom 5 in the league on the power play with a ton at this point of skilled players, how are we sticking to the same thing?
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be Burrows, but it needs to be something. It needs to be a change of mindset. It needs to be a change of positioning. It needs to be I can't watch it when the truth of the matter, Liam, is that this game is won on goals. And if you could capitalize on your chances to score goals with one less guy on the ice, then you're probably going to be a pretty successful team.
I swear we're better 5-on-5 than 5-on-4.
Yeah.
It's
Kirby
just
Dach is a better player 5-on-5 than he is on the power play.
the one thing I don't understand is when we do the drop back play, which I love, by the way, but it's Suzuki
Yeah.
who picks it up. Like, yes, Suzuki's an amazing playmaker. He's gonna get the puck in the zone, but I don't know why Kirby Dach isn't carrying it. He has the body for it. He has the hands for it. I just don't understand. And we can never set up because we get in the zone and we dump it in. Like, why are we dumping it in? So,
And the truth is that the Montreal Canadiens have a very, very, very poor second power play unit. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm obviously happy to see Slav on that right side, one-timer spot. Obviously, you want to see him get the puck a little bit more in that spot. But the truth is, it's not a very talented second unit. Aside from Newhook and aside from Arbor Jacki, who we could both agree has been or will be good in that spot, Gallagher and Anderson are just not power play players. They're just not.
You need a guy who's puck moving, and there's just no puck movers there.
Oh, well, we've ran out, right? We've ran out at that point. Kirby Dach, Suzuki, Cole Caulfield are all on that first unit.
Yeah.
Now you put Newhook on that second unit. Now you're really running out of options.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's obviously what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, the word I'm looking for, I can't think of it, but it's obviously it's very nice to have that for some teams, to have that second unit that can also not equally produce, but I would say produce at a certain level. But Montreal Canadiens as a whole unit, both for the first unit and the second unit, are just going to have to figure it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah. If Arizona could figure it out, we could figure it out. So
there you go. Do we want to go into our predictions for the week? What's the record going to look like for Montreal, Liam? Who's going to be the best player for the Montreal Canadiens this week in terms of points or goals or whatever you want to give to me? And
hot take? We'll give a hot take.
Yeah, give me a hot take. Give me a hot take.
All right. So quickly, the game after Minnesota's versus Washington, and that pretty much concludes the week after that. Only a two game week next week. But so I'm gonna predict a 4-2 win against Chicago. I'll give Bedard a goal there, but I'm gonna give Kirby 2 for the Habs. Against Minnesota, I don't want to sound like I'm biased for the Habs, but I think the Habs are gonna be able to scrape one out here, like a 2-1 win or something. Philip Gustafson gonna shut the door again, but RHP scoring. I think it's going to be a good game between Minnesota and the Habs. So yeah, give me RHP for a goal. I'll call it an overtime win, 2-1 overtime win.
And is RHP scoring that overtime goal? I would doubt it.
He is scoring.
He is. So he's getting on the ice.
Maybe not. Maybe he'll score one, and then OT. We'll give it to Big Mike the point.
Oh my God! Wow, you're really throwing out all these hot takes. Like, if you get these right, I'm clipping it right away. No, you gotta love it.
Wait, and then on Washington versus Washington, we didn't go into Washington too much, but I think we're gonna take.
We'll have an episode before that. We'll have an episode next Friday.
Is the Washington game is on the Saturday?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay,
so I think we'll be back next Friday. So we'll leave it for that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So once again, 4-2 win against Chicago. Kirby Dach with 2 goals, and then a 2-1 overtime win versus the Minnesota Wild. Mike Matheson, lock it in.
So 2-0 for the Montreal Canadiens for the upcoming week. Is that correct?
Yep, we're starting the season strong.
We're starting the season 2-0
in your
case 2-0-1. My hot take or my takes for this week, I think Montreal is going to beat the Chicago Blackhawks 3-1 at home. I think that Monty's going to have an exceptional game. I think that he's going to probably post. I'm going to go with a 30 save win there. And I think that goals are going to maybe it's just because I'm biased. Maybe it's just because I'm a truther, but I'm sensing a Slav goal. I think that there's a lot to like. So that's my take. That's my take. Slav goal in the home opener for the Montreal Canadiens with a 30 save win from Monty. And I think that in that second game on Tuesday against Minnesota, I think that Montreal, I'm going to take the opposite take to you. I think that the Montreal Canadiens lose 2-1. I don't know if it's in overtime. I don't know if it's in regulation, but I think they lose 2-1. I think that's where Philip Gustafson prevails. I think Monty has a solid outing, and I think that Jordan Harris scores the lone goal. But Kaprizov and that
That's hot.
offense are too strong for this Montreal Canadiens team early in this young season. So that's my take.
All
I
right.
think the Montreal Canadiens go 1-1 this week.
Fair enough. I thought you were gonna say like Pat Maroon Hattie or something.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not that crazy. But nonetheless, we're 35 minutes in, and I think that's where we're going to wrap it up because if we're going to do this every week, it's more than fun this way. So we thank you guys so much for. Is there anything you want to say, Liam? By the way,
No, I think we got it all. Got it all down pat.
well, you definitely got us with those hot takes. We'll put it that way. But again, guys, we'll be active on social media. A few things are getting in the way of social media production, but that's fine. That's fine. It happens. It's life. But we'll be back. We'll be back and more consistent.
Yeah.
But make sure to check us out. Make sure to follow with us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. But we'll leave it at that, guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.